AI is not a technology that you plug in. AI is a way of thinking.
How do you recommend people should interact with ChatGPT on a personal level?
You need to think before you start typing and think about the answers that you're going to get back and what it is that you're after. You should be able to go into it and think, it might not tell me what I want to hear and it might not tell me what's true. Just because it sounds really, really clever doesn't mean it's clever.
The younger generation, Gen Z, they use ChatGPT for very personal elements, including as a therapist.
That's dangerous.
The way in which people are using AI nowadays, it seems to be so permeating into what they do, from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep.
We've been doing AI for 30 years. Better to get ready for it than it is just ignore it. AI is not replacing people. AI makes people better at what they do. If you approach it correctly, it will change the way that your business thinks.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Everyday Empires. I have the amazing Philip Milne here with me, ex-military, experienced entrepreneur, and now author, which is very exciting.
Indeed.
Your recent passion, I understand, is artificial intelligence, AI, and I'm very excited to talk to you about that, given it's one of the hottest trending things that everyone's going on about. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself, Philip. So I think you mentioned, and we'll go as far back as you'd like, but you mentioned you were in the military, which I always find fascinating.
I came out of university, went to Sandhurst, and I got very little sleep, and we learned lots of things, but some very, very core lessons have always lived with me. So it's the importance of planning. So the 3 Ps of poor planning and poor preparation was really important, and it's dictated all of the way that I've written, and that one has a very clear aim that one's looking at, and then you strategize how you're going to get there and what you need to get there, and that comes through today and in even today in what I do and what I propose with people.
Yeah, because it's a discipline. I mean, a lot of people say that when they've been through the military, well, however far you get to, that one of the early lessons that's inbuilt into you is that discipline of being able to know what your objective is, work backwards from there, and as you say, plan.
The really, really important lesson is leadership. You learn how to get the best out of a team of people. It's not about you; it's about what they do and how they do it, and how you develop loyalty within a team. I was frustrated because I came out in the mid '80s when Mrs. Thatcher had been doing her thing, which what she did was good and bad, but it was pretty depressing trying to get a job in the mid '80s in the United Kingdom. And there was a gentleman called Sir John Harvey Jones who was heading up the ICI, and he was heavily into the institute directors, etc., saying we need man management. And I sent my CV around to. I just wanted to go and work in a supermarket or somewhere and be able to see my product on the shelf. And I sent my CV out to everyone. They weren't interested. Nobody was interested in someone who was 25 and had spent 3 years learning how to manage people, budgets, how to keep people entertained, how to do things. And I thought that was really sad, but it was indicative of the times. So I had to reverse back in and set up a business with a friend of mine. We started off fairly casual, and it got more serious as we went along, and suddenly found ourselves, I was still touting around for work, and then someone said to me, I'm not quite sure why you're here. You talk passionately about the business that you're working in. I think you probably need to focus on that. And so I did.
That's quite interesting. That's sort of a parallel nowadays with sort of young people struggling to find jobs for a number of reasons. Do you look at what's happening now with, perhaps some of your nieces, nephews, or family members, or friends and their kids, and you go, well, I struggled, when I was 25, and I, had a university degree, I had a great background from the military, I had all the things that people said you should have, but I'm still not getting a job, and that's because of potentially some existential elements, like the market, or some other reasons. Do you find a parallel now between what people have? What
I do, and I think it's really frightening for them because I talk about AI, and everyone is blaming AI for the economy and AI for the lack of jobs. And I was speaking to a niece the other day who's at Trinity Dublin, and she said, amongst my peers, we are really worried whether there are going to be any jobs for us at all, because that's the message that we're hearing. And I'm going, I think there will be jobs for you. You may have to rethink how you do things. I mean, I hate to say this, but I took my O-level maths with a slide rule. I wasn't allowed to go in there with a calculator because calculators did it for you. Uh, I don't know how slide rule works. I haven't got a clue any longer, but I know how my calculator works. But I'd say to them, get into understanding how AI is changing the way people do their work and use it. AI is not replacing people. AI makes people better at what they do. And there are elements of your job that AI will replace, anything to do with data entry or the boring humdrum of using a computer. And it gives you the ability to see lots of information from different angles and make your own decisions as to where you want to follow it. And you've got to become really good at being able to pick what's good and what's rubbish. We talk about this concept called hallucination. Hallucination is just where AI gets it wrong. It's a very posh term for he got it wrong.
Yeah. Understanding your journey to date so far, I mean, you haven't even really bitten into it. But you decided at that time that, okay, the job market is mixed at the moment. I'm not having much success here. I'll create my own job. And I think there's quite a lot of commentary nowadays around young people and sort of what should you do about the circumstance that you're in.
I was lucky in that I had a very good friend that I'd met the first day at university, and we've been friends ever since. And I'd gone into the army and taken a nice salary and ease of use. He'd come straight to the city. I wish I'd gone straight to the city because my life would have been very different. However, I didn't. He was in advertising and he just desperate to want to get out. And we lived in West London, and there was a conclave of people who were all very entrepreneurial, and they were all, so we ended up working in a building very much like this with lots of little offices, but everyone dropping in on each other and helping each other, all building our businesses up. That was in the 80s. And some of those businesses were worth millions of pounds. Some of the people involved are household names on television. And then there was us. But we built our business up slowly. We were in the wrong sector. We went into the hospitality market. We went through we grew a business from naught to sort of 40, 50 million pounds a year. We had 200 or 300 people who were relying on us for their daily bread and their pensions. And it was an exciting ride. It went way up and it went way down. And some years you wondered whether you were going to survive till next year, but you focused down on where you want to get to. And that worked for us. I didn't really, in retrospect, I didn't really enjoy it very much. I was good at it because I'm logistically very concise. That's why it makes me good with computers. That's why I gravitated into that side. But I didn't enjoy it, and I wasn't very good at selling it. Whereas now I am so passionate about what I do now. I just see it as it's so important that we start to understand this juggernaut. I've been talking about AI since 2018 when I set up Intelidat. And to start with, it was really difficult. Nobody understood what I was singing about. And then obviously 2022 November, ChatGPT comes out and takes us all. I mean, it was fantastic at telling us what generative AI was all about. And it shot off and people were running around saying, oh, this is going to change everything. I don't think the reality is it hasn't, because AI has been around since the 50s when it was first defined. Some industries have had AI, manufacturing with robotics and remote process automation. All of those things are all part of AI. I was playing around with machine learning in the early 16, 17, which is another aspect of it. Generative AI just came out in 2018. So that's the leading edge of it. How do you apply that to business? I think people are still struggling with it. We come back to the whys and wherefores of that, but it is changing. If I have one lesson, if anyone on here is running a business and thinking about AI, if you approach it correctly, it will change the way that your business thinks. And that is what it's all about. It's all about knowledge. It's not about clever tools doing everything for you. It's about knowledge, and it's about, I hate the term, surfacing knowledge, but it goes out. In theory, you could think of it as at the starting point is a tool with tentacles into every part of your business, bringing that information back to you and telling you what people are thinking about, not in a sort of big brother way, but in a, you can get rid of the personal information and you can just say, there are people thinking about these subjects, and these people are pushing forwards and these people are not, or this is an issue, or HR are reporting this. And as a business leader, that is fantastic. That is real information coming to you that has not gone through a filter of another human being. It's not someone's opinion. It's got no story behind it. It's just a fact. What do you do with that fact? That's your choice.
You built a very significant business. But you say now that you didn't have much passion for it, even though you were very good at it. I'd love to get into that mindset because I think one of the traditional elements around, say, finding a business idea or running a business is that you have to have a level of passion because it's you're 24/7. You live and breathe it. Is it because you're super passionate about AI? When you look back at how much enthusiasm you had at the time, it's probably just not quite the same, but you still had a level of passion to work your ass off to build that business, to make the tough decisions, to build that business to what very few people are able to achieve. And it's you and your best friend and a core team around you, really.
He brought the passion. So there was at one stage, someone asked me the story, and I said, well, it's a bit like he goes out and promises these things to a client. I don't know whether you can go back to Roadrunner and similar sort of cartoon analogies, but basically the cartoon figure runs out over a chasm and it's my job to keep building the bridges so that cartoon figure, never being my partner, never plummeted to earth in some deep chasm and got washed away. So I was very good at the bits that I did. I didn't bring any passion to it. He brought the passion to the business. And I wasn't aware of that. It wasn't until I'd actually broken away and suddenly found I wasn't frightened of selling things to people. I had a fear of standing up and selling. I didn't believe a lot of the time why people wanted to buy. I'm crucified to actually say that now. But I don't think I could understand why people were buying things off us. I made sure that we delivered above and beyond. We went beyond what the client, I've always been into all of those. We were selling Christmas parties one after the other. Our staff were exhausted with 70,000 people going through on a December, sitting down, having chicken or duck or beef. And we made sure that they had a spectacular Christmas party and that they went back to their offices and they sang our praises and they came back again the next year. But was my heart really in it? Not really. I mean, there were personal reasons behind it in that I had a child suffering from a really bad degenerative condition. So I saw all these young people playing and dancing, and I had a problem because my daughter couldn't do that. And so I used to shut down and walk away from it. That may have been a reason. But now I am so passionate, whether I'm actually making money out of it at times is irrelevant to me. I've got something I'm going to feed back. I'm going to help people do it. And I'm actually really good at it. So one feeds off the other.
Thank you for sharing that story about your daughter. It's very kind of you to mention that. But it's an amazing insight. And just to touch in, what exactly did that business do?
We were a hospitality business. We started off because my partner used to go. My business partner. He was buying media space. So he was entertained. The hospitality budgets were huge, and he was entertained. And for him, it was one marquee after another. He would watch Formula One racing, and then he would go to Wimbledon and watch tennis, and then he would go to a rugby match and watch a rugby match. And this gamut went round and round and round. And actually, frankly, he couldn't remember who'd invited him or what they were doing when they got there. It was just a lot of champagne, wine, beer, and something on a television in the background. And
that was amazing.
And if you were really naughty, you walked outside and actually watched it in live format. So he was bored with that. He was looking for something to do. And there was a sort of growing little market of people who actually put you behind the wheel of a racing car or took you to a tennis match and you played tennis, or you went to not very often we played rugby, but the concept being we found things for people to do and we called it participative entertainment. And so for the first 4 or 5 years, you'd go in to sell to a client, and I did do it, and you would sit down with them and you had half an hour and you'd spend 25 minutes telling them what participative entertainment was all about and why it worked so well, and then 5 minutes about why you were the people to buy it from. So it was quite an uphill task. And I find I'm almost back in that world again now. I'm not selling people why I'm so good at AI and how to use it in a business environment. I'm happy to tell people why they should stop being skeptical about it and actually take it on board, because it's going to hit them at some stage. And now it's better to get ready for it than it is just ignore it.
That makes sense. And actually, touching on AI, you mentioned that it's been around since the 50s. I think people that don't understand the journey of AI are probably quite surprised by that statement, because they might have just heard about ChatGPT, maybe Perplexity and some of these other apps and go, well, that was, only a few years ago. So could you give us a little bit of that history and sort of from the 50s?
So there was a conference, and you're not going to push me because I can't remember the names of the people involved, but it's called the Dartmouth Conference. So it was at Dartmouth College, and the leading lights of at the time, which I believe still included the fabled Alan Turing, defined what they anticipated would be this concept called artificial intelligence. And they started off with the sort of things that we could deal with. People immediately grasped that artificial intelligence is something to do about replicating what humans think. But before that, and it's possibly that now, I don't think it is yet. I think it's replicating, making humans think better. But if you go back to those days, it started to develop the concepts like machine learning, like robotic process automation, like automation. And those were just straight, that was actually part of artificial intelligence. So when I first got involved with computers and business back in the 80s, I came at it from a business point of view, and I wanted to get value out of it. So I was into automating everything that people were doing, not in an overseas, just because I didn't want people entering the same data twice. So I wanted to make sure that if you did something with a client, you recorded it, it became available for the next time you did something, or as you were preparing a quotation, you were already building your supplier register for the event that you were going to run, and you already knew what the money was going to be in, and therefore that projected budget would eventually become the event budget, would eventually become the profit and loss sheet, without having to rekey it and maintain lots of, we still see people with an Excel spreadsheet here, an Excel spreadsheet here, an Excel spreadsheet here, hoping that AI will somehow join the all three together and come up with nirvana, but it doesn't always happen, and it's a struggle. So I always approached things with that mindset, and that was effectively early AI. And people in manufacturing especially will look at, say, ChatGPT. We've been doing AI for 30 years. We've had it. We look at these fantastic production lines where there are no human beings involved, good or bad, but I kind of think, if you're not sweating and doing the same screwy bit every single time, and a computer is putting a long arm out to go ba-joom, 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 and it all works much better, that's probably an improvement. Not if you were hell bent, your life's ambition was to work on a production line, that's probably not so good. But if you moved off from that and you said, I've got another opportunity to do something different, then that's good.
I think from today's age, and so trying to link up systems, that would just be sort of you just being an efficient business. But back in the 80s and 90s, this was relatively novel. So how did you go about creating those systems when, nowadays there's a software you can just pick up off the shelf?
So in the very, very early days, a business in the 80s, I remember before we didn't even have the internet, but we very quickly said, we need to have something where we keep our accounts together. So we had an accounts package. Started off with a few spreadsheets, but it quickly developed into buying something, installing it, and plugging everything in. And we had a very simple CRM system. I seem to remember it was called Tracker. It came from Australia. Had lots of Aborigines and boomerangs on it. But it allowed us to know who our clients were.
Okay.
And then I kept saying it's not doing enough for us, because we didn't have spreadsheets. So we were then having to understand what's going on. And my partner and I, our Friday routine would be every Friday we'd go through everyone's filing cabinets, pulling out all of their, and everything was either green or yellow sleeves, so we knew where they were. And we would open it up and we would write things down in our little ledger, and then we'd close it down, and then we'd go, right, things are looking okay for the past, things are coming together, but next week's looking bad. And we would repeat this every single Friday. So we would never get home till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, because we were just going through this manual repetition. So we were saying there must be a better way of doing it. So I was introduced to someone who wrote in the early days. We're still in DOS. We haven't got to Windows. It won't mean anything to anyone on here, but I was introduced to someone. I said, this is what Tracker looks like. What can you do? Because this is what I want to go on for. And it got then subcontracted through that to someone else, to someone else, to someone else. And eventually this person came back and wrote me, and I said, well, that's brilliant. That's a nice little teeny weeny CRM system. It doesn't do what I want it to do. I want to go from that inquiry through the event management to the reconciliation. And that was the burgeoning of what we call the BMS, Business Management System. And from that early version, we then went 3, 4, 5, 4 variations, I think, by the time I left, as each time new technology arrived and we were able to, but the core system stayed broadly the same. It replicated the processes that we were doing in our business, and it made us more efficient. And as computers changed and as technology allowed us to do more. We incorporated those tools into the system. But the beauty of it was that we very early on built this database. It was in something called Pick to start with, and then it went into Access, and then it went into SQL. And all the time, that was the important element, not the tools that wrote to it. It was, what did that data look like? I call that the master data structure, so that I know where my core data comes from for marketing, sales. You know where all of that stuff, so you can join it all together. Because data, we had in 2006, Clive Humby announced data is the new oil. And that hung around for a while, and then it became a pretty silly cliche. But the reality is that was so important, because if someone was going in to see a new client in the automotive industry, within 20 minutes, we could give them a detailed report of every automotive client they'd done and what they could and couldn't say about that when they went in there. Or if we were launching a new venue at some stage, we could look around at our similar venues and say, what does the sales pattern look like from year 1 to year 10? And how can we build that into a budget? And will it make sense? Should we take it on or shouldn't we take it on? We got so used to asking these questions. When I finished there and started to go out into the big wide world, and people were showing me all these fancy presentations in Power BI and Tableau, and I just felt, the world's passed me by. I don't know what's going on. And then I realized, actually, they didn't either, because they were producing all these things. But every time that chart went up on the wall, the questions would start, and I'd never heard these questions. Where did you get that data from? It doesn't agree with what I've got. I think you've got that wrong. Could you send it to me in an Excel spreadsheet so that I can check what you've done? And by then, whatever insights you were hoping to get have long gone, because you're still worrying about, the lineage of that data, and that spreadsheet then becomes some sort of source of truth until the next argument occurs. And then a new database is emerging, and the old one is parked, Yeah. I love Excel and I hate it. It is so frightening what it can do.
Oh yeah, no, I think a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with Excel, but I find it fascinating what you just described, because what you're articulating is the innovative process of having a clear idea of what you want, but perhaps there's not a software that can clearly do that for you, or there's not nothing off the shelf that you can just pick up and plug in. So you built your own, effectively, with some good people around you. And because you had that very clear idea, because it was developed from a frustration of doing this manual task over and over again on your Friday nights, you decided to create a solution for it. And, I'd love people that are listening to what you just articulated to get into the mindset of, sort of, this is how you innovate. Fine, nowadays there might be more solutions ready for you, but it's that taking that frustration of doing a task which is finding a little bit mundane, a little bit difficult, a little bit manual, and turning it into something like a system and a process.
I think the lesson that I could send back to anyone listening to this and saying, what can I actually do about it, is that our organization was unusual, because I was a founding board member, and I was on the executive board, and people listened to me. They don't listen so much after I finish that organization, but that's the way it goes. However, my interpretation, and I listened to boards, and even some of our conversations, I could see the feeling data is something IT look after. We don't, it's beneath us. We understand balance sheets and profit and loss accounts and marketing strategies, and who else is on there? PR bits. I'm picking the background that a lot of boards will have, and executive boards, the key people on there are the CEO and the CFO, and maybe the marketing director. They're or vice president, or whatever you want to call them. They're the key people that drive the conversation. There is very, very rarely someone who's talking about information, who's talking about data, who's talking about how are we going to measure things, how, from our conversations today, how do we need to adapt our systems going forward so that in a year's time we can measure the results of what's going on, not rely on gut feel and experience. And if you've got an organization relying on gut feel and experience, you need to stop and think, because that is the first indication that you have got problems. And I talk all the time about AI readiness. And I had a spat the other day on LinkedIn with someone who said, I'm sick and tired of people telling me that my data is not AI ready. And I just said quietly, it's not a matter of the data being AI ready, it's a matter of the business being AI ready. And until the business actually says that data, that information is core, central, and absolutely so important to our future that we need to treat. I mean, you're an accountant, you'll talk about intangible assets. Data is a really difficult intangible asset. We go back to Humbly and his data is the new oil. It's just big sludgy stuff. I mean, I was doing some research the other day, and I plugged data as new oil into my tool, and it came back and said, probably not. It's probably more like nuclear waste. Because and I thought, where'd you get that from? But there was someone had written about it, and it's very true. Because if you just stack this stuff up, you've got to pay to store it. You've got to pay to look after it. And if it starts leaking out into the environment in some form or another, it's going to cost you heaps. So that's probably what data looks like. It has a cost, whatever you do, but it only has value when you can do something with it, when you learn something that makes you do something different in the future. And that is not a chart, that is an insight. And we very rarely get insights.
I think when I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs about, why they started their business, what was the genesis of it, what was the inspiration, all these kind of questions, and you hear quite an emotional answer to it, and a lot of it is sort of akin to perhaps a gut feel. And I just took that leap of faith. But then, as the business grows, you need to make high quality decisions to then be able to grow that business and make the right choices at the right times. And that's where you need data, because then it justifies the decision that you're making. You might have a gut feel about a decision, but refining that and how you implement said decision is where the data ultimately helps.
Well, you mentioned something really important. So, as an entrepreneur, you have a purpose and you have strategy that you want to get there. But most of us, I'm unusual in that I've been there, done that. I don't want to grow a business. I don't want to have lots of people reliant on me any longer. It's too emotionally tiring to deal with. I'm reaching at the stage where I'm not ready for that anymore. However, people who are, I would say there are, and I was introduced this by a friend of mine who's a partner at, was a partner at PwC, obviously retired very, very young. And he introduced me to the concept of what's called business inflection points. So he said, we make our millions, but it's only based on two numbers, 7 and 17. And it basically says, as your business grows, as the head count, broadly speaking, goes from 7 people, go through 7 people, go through 17 people, go through 70 people, go through 170 people, you need to be aware that your business needs to change the way it works to get through the next phase. Start it too soon and you're going to do it twice. Start it too late and it becomes more expensive. And it's particularly expensive if you're going through that. If you've gone through the 17 and you haven't done anything about, so this is all about specialization, about reporting lines. It's about hierarchy. It's about who does what job within the organization. Because as the entrepreneur, after 7 people, you don't have enough time to know everything that's going on. You have to have some way of getting people telling you what's going on and then seeing whether the vision and the purpose are still, heading down. So big lesson, as you're growing, think about these inflection points. That as you get to them, you must be ready for the next phase, and there will be changes. And if you look at going from 50 to 100 people, and you realize that underneath your reporting there's one spreadsheet, and if that spreadsheet breaks, the whole lot breaks, you won't be the first person to find that.
I want to switch into your passion about AI because I want to give that a healthy amount of time, and it's. I'm really excited about what we're about to talk about. And the reason why is because so many people think they know a lot about AI. And very often it's just because they spent probably quite a lot of time on some kind of ChatGPT or Perplexity or some kind of mainstream tool. But I'm sitting in front of someone that actually can tell me a lot more about it than probably a lot of other people. And you've written a book. So I want to know a little bit more about why you're so passionate about AI and then flow into sort of what you're doing today.
Okay, so ChatGPT arrived in November 2022. That's, this year it'll be 4 years old. So
Wow.
look at the way the world has changed in those 4 years. Yes, things were going on beforehand, but that was the fuse that lit the blue touch paper and everything took off. So that was 2022, November 2022. And that lit an enormous passion. So for me, it was fantastic. I no longer had to talk to people about what AI meant. They had it all around them. However, I found it really easy to conceptualize the fact that you have personal AI, ChatGPT, and other tools like that, which we have, and that's almost a mature market now. Things that help you as an individual be good at what you do, whether that's personally, arranging your recipes from a photograph and telling you what you need to buy, to running your diary and popping up automatically when you've got a meeting. One tool will just come out and tell you, your meeting, Rohit, this is what he likes, this is what he doesn't like, this is what he's good at. And you never even have to think about it. That's gone off to the internet, found all this information, packaged it ready for you. But it's still personal AI. And if you take AI into a business, as you know, we've got the EU AI Act that's only been around since 2016, but most people haven't heard of it. That puts a responsibility on business leaders to be aware of how AI is being used in their business and if it affects any important business decisions, important business services. And I can't remember the exact wording, but it basically says if you've got something that is really important to other human beings, like hiring and firing, and you use AI in that process, you need to be aware of it, and you need to be aware of why it makes those decisions, which is really difficult if you're using Copilot to do that, because Microsoft don't tell you why it's made. That's their proprietary information, how it goes through, what algorithm it runs through. But you as the business leader should be aware of what that algorithm is. So that's a kind of a nuance that you need to be. But then, like GDPR, we've got all of this personal information going around. There's an apocryphal, and it's not so apocryphal story that back in the early days of ChatGPT, there was an engineer at Samsung working hard to try and fix a problem. And he thought, I'll pop the code into ChatGPT and see what happens. Well, it did, but it then shared it with the training model. So that was proprietary information on how computers, phones, whatever it was. Nobody shared the detail of what it is, but it was a real wake-up call. You can't just be pumping information out into the web. You can't put a whole load of information about people on there because it's gone. Where are your guardrails? So that's when we start to separate personal AI, tools that help you and I, very few guardrails. It's up to us to make them work. And business AI has to have guardrails around it. It has to have governance around it. You have to know what it's doing. You have to know, when is it sharing personal information? When is it sharing confidential information? Who's seeing it? What are they doing with it? So an early bit of my book talks about why you shouldn't do AI, or the worst ways of doing AI. And one of the bits that I try and talk to people about is the importance of separating out ChatGPT and ChatGPT for your business. And it's not just about buying the enterprise version, because it's the way that people use it, not the tool that you're using, and if they can put any prompt they like into it. So early examples of really good tools, Morgan Stanley identified a need, but they had lots of documentation. People were taking a lot of time to read the documents to surface, to then understand how to deal with the problem. They made it really easy. They built an internal ChatGPT that just looked at documents that they'd put up. It was ring-fenced. It didn't go outside of their organization. And within a year, they had 300,000 or 400,000 people using it, because that is the size of the company. Now, that to me is indicative of a problem. We found a fix, and people like the fix. And suddenly you've got 300,000-400,000 people. I mean, that paid for itself on day one.
Absolutely.
But a lot of the time people go, and it's in AI world, it's called pilot. Well, it's always been called pilots, but you're building these pilots and they go around and around circles, and you build another pilot. And actually you get into this purgatory style where all of these pilots are going around. Nobody really knows what value they're supposed to bring to the business. They've got no sunset clauses on them. They've got, they just chew up time, money, resources. And then the leadership go, it doesn't really work, this AI stuff. Don't like it. And actually, the reason it doesn't work is because the intent was not there. You didn't know, you've got to start with a problem. You've got to say, no, AI is great at finding opportunities, but you start small with finding a problem where something like AI can help, and then building it into your team, and then seeing how people use it, and then adapting that. And it might take you 6 months, but we're talking about something with medium long-term use. We're not talking about an immediate hit. The most frightening concepts I see is say a marketing director realizing that they've just rewritten their marketing plan in ChatGPT and everyone should use it. but nobody's been trained how to use it. Nobody has, it comes out with an answer and nobody dares say anything, so they just implement it. You've got to have that psychological safety that people are going to push back against it. You've got to have a clear purpose and intent that it's going to do and how it's going to help people and how they should use it. And it's no good just throwing it out there and seeing what happens.
I'm sure there's some people listening to this right now that find it quite overwhelming to kind of absorb a lot of what you're saying. And so, because I'm thinking right now, do I have those relevant policies for my business, and how do I use ChatGPT for myself? And I think we should split it into the two segments: the personal side and the business side. So on the personal side, how do you recommend people should interact with ChatGPT on a personal level?
Start small. Don't write big long prompts. Write short prompts and develop them as you're going along. ChatGPT have got a great tool within it called GPTs, so you can create your own GPTs. You can build a set of instructions, and then you say, for instance, you're in procurement and you get constantly. I've got a good one. So I work with clients and they always send me an NDA. I use a tool called One NDA, which is fantastic because there's little to no worry about it. But people will send me these NDAs and they're complicated to read. They don't actually have a great deal, negligible value really in them, because very few people ever sue on an NDA, but you have just got to be careful. So I have effectively a space in Perplexity, and every time I get an NDA, I throw it into there, and it'll come back and it'll say to me, and it knows it's not going out to talk about the rest of the world. It is just talking about me. And it says, 0.63 could be put in a risk. This is how you might push back at it. And I read that and I go and read 0.63 and I go, nah, you're overexposing me. But it's a bit like having my own little legal team. But I've built a space that I can do that really, really quickly. In ChatGPT, it's called a GPT. I mean, a friend of mine's shared me a GPT he'd written, which basically says put the title of a book in and it'll go and find out what that book is all about, give you a quick précis whether you want to read it or not, and maybe show you other books that are of a similar bit. Now, I don't have to do anything. I just type in the name of a book and it comes back, where's it going to go and find? So that's an example of a GPT within ChatGPT. So if you are going to use it for yourself in a business environment, think about what use cases you're going to have. Be conscious that you're not putting personal information into it, because that gets pumped out to the big wide world and you lose control of it. And that is where, if it's in a business environment, you should be, it's a business, starting to think about it. You might be using that same OpenAI large language model. And here we get to another thing, what is a large language model? I'm not going to go into that now, but it's something that costs millions of pounds at the moment to produce. And it's a mathematical algorithm that says, if you use this word, it's like to use this word. And then we have an intermediate bit, the chatbot, which is a sort of, it's called natural language processing, which basically takes the language you're using, puts it in its brain and turns it into computer language and sends it off and and then you've got your outputs. So, of course, lost where I've got to. You've got to control all that factory. What you don't want to be doing is giving information to the large language model that it can take off and train. And even if you've got an enterprise version that says, I'm not going to train on it, I would still take that with a degree of a pinch of salt. Most of these large language models are American owned, and the Americans have put in place a law that says every American company must store all its data, so that if the American government wants to go and have a look at it, they can do, which is why the EU gets so excised about Google Analytics and Facebook data and things like that, because we are giving it away. Is it a worry? Yeah, to some people it is.
It's really interesting. So on the personal side, you said don't feed too much personal information into the model, or into ChatGPT. So if someone, I think there's two things that come to mind. If someone has, to what extent is that worrying? So if you've put like a birthday or like something relatively personal about yourself, to what extent is that actually a worry?
Not allowed to share under the law, under GDPR, we're not allowed to share personal identifiable information with third parties unless we've got permission. If I've got your data on my database and I've got permission, little tick boxes, how am I going to use your data? I'm restricted within that environment. If I put your data into something like chat, there is a chance that data will be picked up and will be used. Google Analytics were being done not because they were putting your name and email address into their data, because they were putting your IP address in. And The European argument was that you could identify a person based on the IP address. That's the address where you're sitting at that's going out to the internet. And that's being stored because they just want to know the location. On someone's graph, it looks really nice. I've got 200 people from the UK and 34 from the US. And, what do I learn from that? From a GDPR point of view. And I'm only saying that because we are subject to the law that the General Data Protection Regulations bring in, and we're also subject to the law, the EU AI Act, because we haven't broken free of either of those. They put regulatory requirements on us, and therefore, if we don't aspire to them, whether we think it's right or wrong, we are breaking the law, and we just, that could have implications if you have a breach.
Shipping out the business use for now, because I know a lot of people, I've got a lot of friends that use ChatGPT for just building out some ideas, brainstorming. I've got a few friends that will use ChatGPT for as a therapist.
That's
And
dangerous.
just which well, actually, let's explore that. So why is it dangerous?
Because it can be pretty blunt what it tells you to do. I'm really, really, I can't face it anymore. Well, the best way of killing yourself would be X, Y, Z. It hasn't got a moral clause in there. It's just going, I've discovered this. From a medical point of view or a therapist point of view, as an assistant to the therapist, I think it's a fantastic tool. It will make you a better therapist. So if you're sitting in a session like this and recording it, and it's coming up with questions in front of you, issues that it's thinking about, then for the therapist, that is brilliant. That's making you far more powerful, and you're never writing anything down to irritate the person sitting on the other sofa because it's recording everything that you're doing. And but it's a bit like saying I've gone to the doctor, but I've checked Dr. Google as the medics will have confirmed it. I'm dying of some rare disease that nobody's ever heard of before. That's just unfiltered. That's dangerous. So I think that is, but human beings have got to make human decisions, but you should be able to go into it and think, it might not tell me what I want to hear, and it might not tell me what's true. Just because it sounds really, really clever doesn't mean it's clever.
The younger generation, Gen Z, there are statistics out there that how often they use ChatGPT for very personal elements, including as a therapist. And I hear your point around ChatGPT maybe being quite blunt and maybe not, even though you can put in prompts around you are a trained therapist for 30 years and you will speak to me in certain ways. However, many people do those prompts and actually put some of those guards up is probably questionable. But even if you have those guards up, you're still releasing very personal information to a model that is learning constantly. So if someone is in that state where they want to use ChatGPT for or an AI tool for very personal elements, do you recommend that at all, or do you recommend a sort of lighter touch?
Much lighter touch. I think there's a whole heap of big discussion yet to be had about AI and education. I go back to my slide rule and my calculator story when I was 16. Will we be educating people in the right way if we carry on with this model where you have to learn one fact after another fact after another fact? What is the point? I've got a tool that can return all of those facts instantaneously. I don't have to carry them in my head. As a doctor, I don't have to carry all this stuff as a solicitor, whatever. What I have to be able to do is have enough chutzpah to actually understand what the answer means and whether the answer is sensible or not sensible. And so going back to the therapist thing is, how do we teach people that this tool will help you, but you need to understand how to read the answer. Don't accept the answer at face value. That is why I'm frightened, because even if it's the therapist will look at the person they're talking to and gauge their comment to the way the eyes flash or don't flash. They won't give it verbatim at that moment. I'm really sorry to tell you that you've got cancer and I expect you to be dead within a week. They're going to get it there, but they're going to be sympathetic about the way
Yeah, massage it a little bit more. Yeah.
So I think it's an education piece. It's how do we, and it's not just kids. This has arrived. I'm old, and it arrived in 2022, and I had to learn how to use it. You say to me I'm an expert. I'm not really, because my expertise is how to use such a tool in a business, not how to write a large language model, or otherwise I'd be working in San Francisco for OpenAI and it'd be much less work.
So, just to round that off then, because I know so many people that do use this and don't have the safeguards put in place, and they've probably been using it for a good few years now. Is there anything they can do or anything they should do to protect themselves, or any sort of tips you would give them, the next time they use ChatGPT for something quite personal?
I can't really answer that question, because you need to think before you start typing, and you need to think about the prompts that you're going to do, and think about the answers that you're going to get back and what it is that you're after. So my generic issue is build a space that is safe for you. So start telling it how, the intelligence of the prompts. What is it that I'm trying to ask? I'd be inclined to say go to a therapist.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be inclined to say go to
Yeah.
ChatGPT and ask it to be a therapist.
You see the appeal, and sorry for sitting on this, because it's a massive trend that's happening, and it is really important, and I know it's straying a little bit away from business, but it's, for me personally, I mean, I would admit I've asked ChatGPT personal questions, but the allure for me was that I felt it's mine. It's on my phone. I can just go into a quiet corner and ask a couple of questions, and see what spits out. And
it's not yours. It's not yours. It's you share it.
Yeah.
You share it with many hundreds of millions of people, but it's not yours.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, realistically speaking, they're probably not going to identify that it's this person with this thought and so on. But it's still information that's out there.
And if you're worried about that being out there, would you go and share your therapist moment from the top of the pavilion outside the window here and see who stops to listen? I mean, nobody's really going to stop to listen, but someone might. If you feel comfortable doing that, then carry on. It's not a straightforward answer. It's not a straightforward question.
Yeah, no, it's I think it's a word of warning, perhaps, to those that are using these tools, just to take a half a step back and think about the prompts.
But if you do the same thing and you bring it around to your business environment, then use that same thought process. Say, would I be happy sharing this information about my business? Would I be happy posting it on my website? If it's your balance sheet, maybe. And profit and loss, probably not. Salary schedule, definitely not.
Yes.
You kind of think, where am I going to do this? Where am I going to stop? And that's the difference between a personal tool and a business tool.
You're mentioning therapists using AI, but using it in a way that they are still the filter. They still use their expertise to understand the outputs from whatever tool they're using, and then advising or doing whatever they need to do accordingly. But when you're younger, you don't have necessarily that level of expertise, or perhaps you don't have an accreditation qualification, or maybe perhaps enough life experience to interpret the answers that you get from this tool. You just rely on it. And so younger people that have downloaded AI, perhaps teenagers who have downloaded AI and just using it for their studies and naturally filter into other topics. How do they still develop the skills to then be able to interpret, the responses that are coming out from a tool like ChatGPT?
I suspect this is a big education piece. To me, is not a question of stopping people using it. It's a question of change. I think we're fundamentally going to have to change the way that we teach people, because at the moment we learn facts and we learn lots of facts, and sometimes it enthuses you and sometimes it doesn't. And unfortunately, far too many people are never enthused by it. But the reality is that you're going to come out into a world where facts are at your fingertip. And I think that what one needs to do is to have lessons in how these generative AI tools work in general. So therefore, what happens when you share information with it and what are the dangers? And then what's really, really important is, how do you interpret the answers you get back? And it's going to put a challenge on the teachers. I mean, in some ways, it's potentially really exciting, because we're going to get more curious. We want to encourage curiosity. We don't want to encourage dogma. However, both of those can come from computers and or from people. So the dangers, there's a whole social, I believe, social media education accountability bit, which doesn't mean you can just shout and it comes back with an echo and you therefore believe that you're right. We've got to get back to the stage of teaching people to question what they hear and to be honest about what they want to hear about. And that just goes to understanding how you use these tools for cognitive development. What do we need to build it? I don't know. I'm not an educational person, but I think it's a really, really important point. We can't just ban AI from schools because it's here. It's a bit like should we ban mobile phones going? I don't know. I'm not a teacher. I dread to think how difficult they are with those tools going into there. But they, at the same time, have got a responsibility to start thinking, how do I use this new environment so that my kids leave school ready to join in the big wide world and get benefit out of it and know how to use it, as well as growing up to become rounded human beings.
Yeah, that's such a powerful, I think, point to raise, because it's there are a number of countries considering banning social media for sort of under 16-year-olds. I think Australia's already done it.
It's done it. We're talking about it.
But AI is a completely different beast and impacts people arguably a lot more. And my concern is, and actually, by the way, I see this a lot with clients, and I don't mind telling them off here or directly, is that they'll just research something and go, oh, I should be able to claim this tax relief. And I go, I don't think so. I mean, I'm pretty sharp on these things, but I don't think so. Share with me the prompts you've put into ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever you're using. And often it's just, this is my business, and they put their company's house link on. Am I missing any tax reliefs? And then it'll just ream off a list of random tax reliefs that may or may not apply. Most of them don't. And then they call me up and go, right, I'm missing this tax relief. And I went, you're definitely not, because that definitely doesn't apply to you because of these couple of rules. And they go, oh, okay. And then, but most of the time, I'm able to convince them because they've had that human interface. But a lot of the times, people are relying very heavily on what they're being told by AI. And these are mature, intelligent adults. And I dread to think sort of someone who's a bit younger, who has less life experience, not because they're younger, it's just because you are more impressionable when you're young, and you take the value of adults and what they say, and you generally think they're telling you the truth, and there's value to what.
Well, we're seeing that in real life in terms of the XAI and our good friend Mr. Musk. What was he allowing the tool to come back and say to you? And, I don't know what his personal political beliefs are. Some of them are quite frightening. Some of them may not be. But if you have the ability to influence the model so that it returns a certain sector, and the kids, my kids used something before Facebook called Be Me or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but that was the original Like Friends Reunited. But it became everything became Facebook after a while, and everyone uses Facebook. But if the cool kids break off and they're using another tool that uses a large language model that re-emphasizes erroneous beliefs to them, which countries exist in the world and which countries don't exist, what your religious beliefs should tell you or they shouldn't tell you, what your neighbors should say to you, and so on and so forth. These are really frightening concepts that come up that can cause huge problems in humanity. And I was smiling slightly when you were talking about stopping 16-year-olds, under 16s, thinking to myself, there are certain over 80s that I think should be stopped from using social media as well. Because what they say on there is completely untrue.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
But I won't go into details.
You bring up a really good point around sort of erroneous elements, because facts are still, obviously a lot of things are established, but some facts are still not as established, or perhaps it's a very nuanced conversation to come back to a potential conclusion. And depending on your beliefs, you might have different conclusions. So how do you articulate that?
Well, it's the danger of the algorithm behind it. So, I think the world would be better if Facebook et al. Were not allowed to have an algorithm. If they just said, you've joined all of these groups, you will listen to what all of them have got to say. We can't understand, if I start expressing some belief in religious things, I'm going to get an awful lot to come back to me. And I end up in an echo chamber, which keeps re-emphasizing my basic beliefs. Now, I call that grooming even if it's not deliberate grooming, but I think that Facebook et al. Have got a responsibility to face up to that. And their algorithm is not just about them making more money, because they are causing a world where people shout at each other a lot. and people have lost the respect for other human beings, I think, because I hear people talking to each other in ways that I kind of question, where did you learn to just be so abusive to people? I just happened to be walking past you. I wasn't interested in what you were doing, but suddenly I've got to become engaged. And I think that's really important. And I mean, there is an underlying fear that AI is going to kill the world. It's all going to come to. And there was quite an interesting, I can't remember the name of it now, but it's something like AI 2027. It's a website, and I will look it up and I'll send you the link, but AI-2020. And it is this story about the evolution of a figment story of the evolution of AI. And you could choose the ending.
Wow.
And you say, what do you think the end is? And it rewrites itself to come. And I don't believe, but I understand the rationale behind what they were writing. And I think it made it really interesting. So you can't believe everything you read, but you should read lots to make you understand what you do believe.
I think what's amazing is that I don't think there's really a tool or a guidebook out there. I think ChatGPT just was out there, and then people downloaded it and started having fun with it. And then inevitably the fun questions came into more serious ones, and it just evolved. But the way in which people are using AI nowadays, it seems to be so like permeating into what they do from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep. And I've certainly used it. I'm a terrible sleeper, and I just can't get it right. So I've asked it questions about give me some tips about what it could be.
Well, there are others that are more prosaic than that. So these gamification things where you put your photograph on and it turns you into an old person or a young person. You've just given your photograph to someone who may or may not be living in a nation state that will use that information in a future attack. And it's great. You've laughed about it, but they will then know where you work. They will then know so they can create something that allows them to get into your business because it's it's got your photograph on it. And yet you've just given it away for free.
And that's amazing, because my laugh was because I wanted to see what I look like old, or probably with hair, to be honest with you. and then that innocent kind of playful thing, which I might have done with my wife.
And I'm not saying all of those programs do that, but I know one or two of them do, and they collect that information and they store those photographs, and they are allegedly in a country somewhere east of Berlin.
And it's allegedly, but it's one of those things where the tools that we've mentioned are namely the American ones, but of course there are plenty of tools out there from other countries that might have slightly looser rules on how they use data, and the governments might have more access to the data that's being stored. It sounds like we should be quite wary of those, maybe even more so.
Yes.
The short answer.
Well, yes is my
yeah,
answer.
yeah,
yes, I am wary of the links that come in on my email because I naturally don't want people to join my computer with me. So I'm naturally wary about what tool I use, and I do pay for a tool because I want a degree of satisfaction that so therefore I don't plug my questions into any old tool and see what happens, because it could be being used for a different reason than I want to. And every little business works with bigger businesses, so therefore you're always a target. The cybersecurity is probably the biggest cost that businesses are facing today outside of staff, and it just keeps getting larger and larger, and the attack surfaces get bigger and bigger, and AI is introducing a whole new layer of surfaces for people to go, that's not my business. But I'm firmly conscious that when you're doing your little bit, it's going to have an effect on the big bit, and you need to be aware of or take that into account before you let it loose in your business.
Oh, absolutely. And I think from the business perspective now, shifting that, I mean, where you shared a wonderful story about Morgan Stanley, who's obviously got large budgets and have hundreds of thousands of people working with them.
The size of the budget is relevant. It's the cost of the problem.
Okay.
So you need to say, how much is this issue costing us? So they're going, we have hundreds of thousands of documents, and we have hundreds and thousands of people reading those documents and reading them again and again and again. That is costing us, let's go $500 an hour on average, because some of these people are paid a lot of money and some of them are not paid so much. That's an awful lot. So my first question is, if someone says this is I go, what is the cost of it? Because that gives us an idea of what budget we put at it before we cease to add value.
What would be, I wouldn't say a quick win, but maybe something that a business leader of a small business, let's say they have less than 5 employees, that they want to get AI within their business, they want to get their people learning AI. Where would they first go? What's the first approach? Do you think they should use?
I bang on the table saying a business needs to be AI ready. That's not to do with your data. That's a mix of people, processes, systems, thinking, hierarchy, reporting. All of these questions come into play. Where is your knowledge? I'm going to come back to the knowledge in a moment, and I'm very happy to share the diagnostic I use, which is just 20 questions that gets you to focus on different parts of your business and bring them together. And it by default comes back and says AI might be a worry, or you need to concentrate on this area. And it just covers business and leadership and knowledge retention, and I'm gone blank, culture and reporting and data awareness. And the 20 questions come at you in a random order. You just answer them. It's designed to be answered really quickly, straight off the top of your head. And it comes back and tells you you've got a score of 50% or something. But more importantly, it says you might need to focus on these bits here. And I can very quickly take that and repurpose it if it's a serious inquiry, to say this means that we need to put these guardrails in place. We're probably talking governance very early on, because you should have an AI policy that says what you can and can't do with it. And if you're going to stop people using AI, you think Canute and pushing back the tide sort of attitude, you need to put in place a governance that allows people to use AI to help their jobs, because you're not going to stop them doing it, because they're all out there doing it, even if they just switch to using it on their phone rather than on the computer, the work computer.
I think people jump at a tool because it's so easy to download the app or sign up, maybe even pay for it, or they have free versions, which is still pretty extensive, and just get on with your work. As a business owner, operator in particular, you just want to get on with it. You don't have time to sit there and go through things. But I think a word of warning is that you do have to actually take half a step back and really think about.
You're legally required to.
Well, there we go.
With nothing else, you are legally required to. So it's a bit like saying, you've got to put your VAT return in. You know when that's got to go in, and you make sure you've done it, and someone comes along and knocks on the door and hands you a fine if you haven't done it. Nobody's come out of the woodwork that I'm aware of yet and fined anyone under the EU AI Act. But kind of like GDPR, it's work in progress, I suppose. Someone will make a decision based on something, even if it's just firing someone or making them redundant. And that person discovers that AI was involved in it because someone used it to make a assessment about who did which job and who did it better. And we're going to do a logical way of doing it, because it's and if they say the team were not aware of the implications of AI, the bosses were not aware of the implications of AI, you're suddenly, you're guilty.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether it affects the outcome, you're guilty.
I didn't know. I knew some of what you said, but to the extent of in which people are legally required to utilize AI, to understand how AI is being used for their business.
In important business. So you don't have to, if you run a photo laboratory or something like that, and people are using AI just to ask personal questions, or, how can I get more clients? That's not important.
Yes. Yeah.
But if it's something to do with hiring or firing, or it's something to do with who you'd use as a supplier or not, you're kind of getting into the area where humans are involved, decisions are made.
Oh, that makes sense. And if they want to find out more, could they ironically ask ChatGPT to?
Yes. Yeah. It knows lots about EU AI Act, and that's something that you can plug in quite broad information about your business and how you use it, and what are the implications for you. Go for it.
And just to round off this conversation on AI, I mean, what are the things you're looking at? So when you wake up as someone that obviously deals with this industry, deeply, what are the AI tools or AI trends or anything that you're looking at day to day?
Right. So my focus is on business use only. So I don't, if you want a prompt machine, that's not me. I use it personally, and I know how I use it, but I don't push it very hard. From a business point of view, the first thing I would say to anyone, whether they're involved in AI or then, they've got some tools, they've got some pilots, they think they're doing it, I would say, stop, look at your business quite hard, do something like this diagnostic, ask yourself the questions, is it going to work? Because if you think AI is just another technology tool that you can buy and sell and do with it, it's not. The reason it doesn't work for lots of people is that AI focuses a very, very bright light on your business. And wherever those cracks, wherever those fissures, they become chasms. So if you have a disconnect between one department and another, and there's no way of closing it, AI is just going to expose that. So you need to get your pillars in place so that you've got a leadership team that understands it. You've got comfortable working environment with people, psychological comfort. You've got something that I call the as-is model, which is becoming more and more important. So how does my business work? How does my client journey follow from the time they arrive to the time they leave? How does my HR, my IT, how do all of these things come into play? Where are my risks? Where are my compliance? You need to understand all of that. And AI gives you the tools to be able to do that without being something that's going to change the way that you work. But it just tells you as a leader, effectively, you're building one subject matter expert that understands the whole business. And if you get it to the stage where people are using that in a real-time environment, so when they do a risk register, they're doing it within that tool, it exposes not only where risk is not being considered, it should expose where things are not accounted. Everything in a business should be accountable. There should be an individual who is accountable for everything that you do. Why? Because you can't make a computer accountable, so you make a person accountable, and it means that they're on top of that. It's part of their job description to do it. And when they leave, you pull down a list and say, right, it's accountable for all these things. Who's going to take them over? So if you have something like risk management, a great tool, use of it was the CFO pulled his leadership team in and he said, we've got these 25 key risks in our business. 3 of them have got someone accountable. Nobody leaves this room until everyone in here has accepted accountability for one of those risks. And you walk out and suddenly, okay, I better take that seriously. And if it fails, if that goes poof, we can't just go, it's cabinet responsibility. No, I am responsible. I'm accountable for that thing. I'm not responsible. And you get all this stuff in data management, which is all about ownership. And we need to get away from that. We need to get a responsibility. You are responsible for doing something. Everyone owns it.
Philip, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's been fascinating. I've learned a lot as well, personally. I try to interact with AI as much as I can to help do what I do.
I'd like to plug my book.
Yeah,
Making Business AI Work.
So run me through your book very briefly and what people will get value out of reading it.
It is for a business leader who doesn't understand AI. In fact, one of the chaps that I worked with over the years, I sent a copy to him. And he said, I got more value out of reading that than I did any of the other technical stuff that I'd sent to him, because he was telling me he's changing career jobs and I was telling him about it. He said, because it just focused how AI works within an organization, not tools, but the disciplines that you need to have within the organization. Because AI is not a technology that you plug in. AI is a way of thinking. It changes the way your business runs.
And what was the title again?
Making Business AI Work. It's available on Books By. I'll give you the link to that, or you can just find it on Amazon.
On YouTube, there'll be a link in the description to pick that up, because I'm hoping you get from what I got from this conversation is that Philip knows a thing or two, and it's definitely worth reading his book. So we'll make it easy for you to flow through and buy some copies.
Thank you.
But we ask everyone and all guests of Everyday Empires this final question, which I'm hoping you've had a little bit of time to prepare for. The question is, if your 18-year-old self had a conversation with your 80-year-old self, what would that conversation be about?
Learn very quickly what constitutes real value. So my skill set, real value is something that costs less than the benefit is greater than the cost of putting it in place. And always keep that in mind, because that is what business works on. It's real value. It's not perceived value. It's not bells and whistles. It's what value does it return to the business. And if you start from that, just have fun.
So that's your 80-year-old self telling the 18-year-old.
Remember to have fun.
Yeah, and I think that's...
Don't get into the hospitality industry.
I really liked how you articulated
Thank you.
that real value point, because a lot of people might be listening to this conversation and sort of going, well, we're talking about systems and processes, and perhaps that's not the sexiest side of business. Perhaps people want to listen about this exciting story about how you won this client or whatever. But in reality, what you're talking about is the value of a business. It's why you could build out revenue to such an extent. It's why you could have hundreds of people working for you. It's because you have the logistics.
Well, it's So hospitality was a very, very slim margin business. So people made it less profitable. So we had to have systems that allowed those people to do their jobs really, really well and not get bogged down in things that were not adding value to the process.
Oh,
they added
absolutely.
value when they spoke to people, when they interacted with people. They don't add value when they're typing things into a computer.
Which is a realization about how you're able to build a business worth that much. Because when people, and we get to the question all the time, how do I build a business that's worth selling? How do I build a business that someone else can take over? How do I build a business that I'm not so involved in? A huge part of the answer to a lot of those questions and more is around, well, what systems do you have in place? What processes do you have in place? If your key people left the business tomorrow, could someone else step in and follow, the guides, the standard
That is the
operational
most
procedures?
important bit that AI is coming into play with is business knowledge. You probably carry 90% of your business knowledge in your head. And if I joined you tomorrow, I'd have a little bit, but on average, it's about 42% of know-how, how things get done, sits in people's heads. And if those people leave, it walks out the door with them.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm actually dealing with that very similar situation for a client right now. And it's the biggest worry was, well, they have access to all these systems. They've got these passwords. They've got an understanding of how to do.
Well, the first bit you can deal with, cut them off. That's easy. That's process. But how do you capture what they know in their heads? The worst person to lose is the person that everyone says, go and ask Rohit. Because you are the most valuable person in that organization. No matter how many clients you bring in, everyone says, go and ask Rohit.
Yeah. Oof. And that's scary.
That's scary.
Yeah. Philip, thank you so much for your time. I
Pleasure.
really appreciate
enjoyed
it.
I didn't realize the time had gone so quickly.
I know. I just glanced right now and I thought, oh gosh, we've got to wrap this up, otherwise we'll get kicked out. But
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I really hope the audience probably listen to this a couple of times, because even I'm thinking back through the conversation now, and I'm probably even going to go start implementing some bits you're talking about. Definitely read your book, because
definitely do the audit. Do that. That's the most important thing you can do.
And this is the diagnostics.
The diagnostic, I'll share that with you. It's so straightforward and easy to use, and it just gets you thinking. You do have to give me your email address, but purely and simply so that the report can get back to you.
Okay, perfect.
And don't use a generic email address, info@ or news@, because it could be that there are things going to be shared on there that you don't want the rest of the team to know about.
Well, there we go. So we'll put that link in the description as well, and use your direct email address. But look, Philip, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on down, and very excited for this episode to release.
Thank you very much indeed for your time.